Good afternoon, teacher and classmates. Today I'm going to talk to you about two different approaches which are part of the alternative 20th century approaches and methods. I'm going to start by talking to you about the natural approach. This approach was developed by Tracy Terrell in 1977. We are going to see four different aspects: the background, the approach, the design, and the procedure. Regarding the background, so what is the natural approach? The natural approach, as well as traditional approaches, are based on the use of language in communicative situations without recourse to the native language and without reference to grammatical analysis. Some authors assume that natural approach, natural method, or direct method are synonymous terms. Okay, so this approach has different names. Then let's talk about the approach itself, distinguishing between the theory of language and the theory of learning. First, the theory of language. According to authors Terrell and Crescent, they see communication as the primary function of language, and they refer to the natural approach as an example of a communicative approach. Regarding the theory of learning, here we distinguish five different hypotheses. The acquisition learning hypothesis, which is here we distinguish between acquisition and learning. Acquisition is an unconscious process, whereas learning is a conscious one. The second one is the monitor hypothesis. Here we call upon conscious learned knowledge when we communicate. The next hypothesis is the natural order. Grammatical structures are acquired before others in both first language acquisition and second language acquisition. The input hypothesis is about the relationship between what the learner is exposed to of a language and language acquisition. And the fifth hypothesis is about the affective filter. Affective variables related to second language acquisition are motivation, self-confidence, and anxiety. The next point here, it's about the design. Okay, so how the syllabus is designed in this approach. What are the objectives? The natural approach is for beginners and is designed to help them become intermediates. It has the expectation that students will be able to function adequately in the target situation. They should be able to make the meaning clear, but not necessarily be accurate in all details of grammar. Now, how about the syllabus? How is the syllabus organized in the natural approach? Well, there are four different aspects. One is basic personal communication skills in the oral form, for example, listening to announcements in public places, basic communication skills in the written form, like reading and writing personal letters, academic learning skills in the oral form, for example, listening to a lecture, and then academic learning skills in the written form, for example, when we take notes in class. So, what type of learning and teaching activities do we have in the natural approach? Here, the emphasis is on presenting comprehensible input in the target language. To minimize stress, learners are not required to say anything until they feel ready. Acquisition activities, pair work, led by the teacher, which focus on providing comprehensible input, minimizing learner anxiety, and maximizing learner self-confidence. Then, what is the learner's role in this natural approach? The learner has to provide information about their specific goals so that activities focus on the topics most relevant to their needs. Take an active role in ensuring comprehensible input. Decide when to start producing speech and when to upgrade it. Decide with the teacher the amount of time to be devoted to learning grammar. Now, what is the teacher's role in this natural approach? The teacher is the primary source of comprehensible input for acquisition. The natural approach teacher creates a friendly and interesting classroom atmosphere by providing subject matter of interest to students. The teacher must guide activities. He is seen as responsible for collecting materials and designing their use. And then we have the role of instructional materials. The primary role of materials in the natural approach is to make classroom activities as meaningful as possible by relating them to the real world and by fostering real communication among learners. The primary aim of materials is to promote comprehension and communication. So how does this approach work? What is the procedure? We can start with some total physical response comments. We can say, for example, stand up, raise your right hand. We can introduce terms and props into comments like pick up a pencil and put it under the book, or touch a wall, go to the door and knock 3 times. No? So we can combine pictures with total physical response. Like when we ask Jim, for example, find a picture of the little girl with her dog and give it to the woman with the pink blouse. No? So these are ways how the natural approach is tackled in a classroom. So this is the first approach, the first method, alternative 20th century approach and methods. And the second one we're going to see is total physical response, which was developed by James Asher in the 1960s. So what is total physical response? TPR is a language teaching method built around the coordination of speech and action. It attempts to teach language through physical, that is to say, motor activity. Comprehension approach refers to comprehension abilities precede productive skills in learning a language. The teaching of speaking should be delayed until comprehension skills are established. Skills acquired through listening transfer to other skills. Teaching should emphasize meaning rather than form, and teaching should minimize learner stress. So this is um, what the total physical response approach preaches. Then, as a second part, let's talk about the approach itself, distinguishing between theory of learning and theory of language. According to the theory of language, most of the grammatical structure of the target language and vocabulary items can be learned from the use of the imperative by the instructor. So in this approach, using the imperative is quite useful and meaningful to communicate instructions in the target language. According to the theory of learning, here we distinguish 3 hypotheses: the bioprogram, the brain lateralization, and the reduction of stress. The bioprogram says that there is an innate bioprogram for language learning. The sequence is listening before speaking, and the mode is to synchronize language with the individual's body. The brain lateralization says that, according to author Asher, a child language learner acquires language through motor movement, using the right hemisphere um, for activities. In a similar way, adults should proceed to language mastery through right hemisphere motor activities. And the third hypothesis is the reduction of stress. By focusing on meaning interpreted through movement, the learner liberates from self-conscious and stressful situations and is able to devote full energy to learning. Now, let's talk about the design. So what are the objectives of a total physical response? To teach oral proficiency at the beginning level. Comprehension is a means to an end, and the ultimate aim is to teach basic speaking skills. Goals must be attainable through the use of action-based drills in the imperative form. As I said before, the use of the imperative is quite important in this total physical response approach. How is the syllabus designed in TPR? Unlike grammar-based methods, TPR requires initial attention to meaning rather than the form of items. Grammar is taught inductively. The imperative is a powerful facilitator of learning, but it should be used in combination with many other techniques. The optimal combination will vary from instructor to instructor and from class to class. What are the type of activities in teaching activities? Well, imperative drills are the major classroom activities in TPR. They are typically used to elicit physical actions and activity on the part of the learners. The class activities include slide presentations, role plays on everyday situations. Reading and writing activities may also be employed to further consolidate structures and vocabulary. What is the learner's role in TPR? Well, learners in TPR have the primary roles of listeners and performers. Learners have little influence over the content of learning, since content is determined by the teacher, who must follow the imperative-based format for lessons. Learners monitor and evaluate their own progress. They are encouraged to speak whenever they feel ready to speak. What is the teacher's role in TPR? Well, the teacher plays an active and direct role. The instructor is the director of a stage in which the students are the actors. It is the teacher who decides what to teach. The teacher is encouraged to be well prepared and well organized. The teacher has the responsibility of providing the best exposure to language so that the learner can internalize the basic rules of the target language. Thus, the teacher controls the language input the learner receives. And as a final aspect, what is the role of instructional materials? There is generally no basic text in TPR course. For absolute beginners, lesson may not require the use of materials, since the teacher's voice, actions, and gestures may be a sufficient basis for classroom activities. As the course develops, the teacher will need to make or collect supporting materials to back up teaching points. So how does TPR work? Some classroom instructions for an adult course in which individual students were moved with commands such as we can say, for example, Jeff, throw the red flower to Maria, or Eduardo, take a drink of water and give the cup to Elaine, or draw a rectangle on the chalkboard, pick up a rectangle from the table and give it to me. Then we can reverse the roles, no? Where the student is the commander and the teacher is the performer. No? So we can also invert roles. Okay, to conclude regarding this presentation, in the natural approach, a focus on comprehension and meaningful communication, as well as the provision of the right kinds of comprehensible input, provide the necessary and sufficient conditions for successful classroom second and foreign language acquisition. Regarding the natural approach, this approach emphasizes comprehensible and meaningful practice activities rather than production of grammatically perfect utterances and sentences. Asher stressed that total physical response should be used in association with other methods and techniques. Target language and vocabulary items are learned from the use of the imperative, where teachers play decides on content and learners are listeners and performers. Well, as you can see, this has been my presentation regarding two basic approaches, the natural approach and total physical response. Thank you for having listened to me.